The air in the prison block tasted of despair and stale Arcturian rations, a metallic tang that clung to the back of Greg's throat. For 5 agonizing years, that was all he knew. But that changed the day the Arcturian warrior Lita dragged a terrified, half-human child into his cell block, a child with eyes that mirrored his own, a child the Arcturians planned to execute to crush a Xeno rebellion. Greg endured the monotonous routine as best he could. Wake to the blare of the Arcturian dawn cycle, a harsh blue light flooding the cell block. Eat the tasteless protein paste they called rations. The metallic tang never faded, no matter how many cycles he choked it down. Barter for scraps of information, for a moment of quiet, for anything that broke the crushing sameness. Exercise in the cramped cell, pushing his body to its limits to keep his mind from dissolving into nothingness. Sleep if he could, haunted by memories of Earth, of his wife, of a life stolen. Then the screech of the access panel ripped through the predictable drone of the prison. Lita, an Arcturian warrior, clad in gleaming black armor that seemed to absorb the dim light, she moved with a terrifying grace. Her helmet obscured her features, but the power radiating from her was unmistakable. She shoved something ahead of her. Greg saw it was a child, barely more than a toddler, half-human by the looks of her, whimpering and stumbling as Lita dragged her along by a thin arm. Greg's breath hitched. The child was thin, her clothes ragged, her eyes wide with terror. But it was her eyes that froze him. One was the deep blue of a summer sky, the other a warm, earthy brown. Heterochromia iridium, a genetic quirk, a recessive trait he carried. He'd seen that pattern only once before, reflected in the mirror as he held his newborn daughter. Ilara. Lita stopped before his cell, the child cowering behind her armored legs. Her voice, distorted by the helmet's vocoder, was cold and devoid of emotion. This hybrid is designated a threat to Arcturian stability. Genetic anomaly, rebellion seed, termination order is in effect. Greg felt a cold fist clench around his heart. The words were meaningless bureaucratic jargon, but the intent was clear. They were going to kill her, his daughter. A memory flashed through his mind, weeks before his capture, hunched over ancient Xeno tablets, deciphering a star map that revealed the Arcturians' hidden history. A history they desperately wanted to keep buried. His research, that's why he was here. Lita shifted slightly, her armored hand tightening on the energy rifle slung across her back. The movement was almost imperceptible, but Greg noticed. She wouldn't meet his eyes. She was looking down at the child, a flicker of something regret crossing her faceplate. The High Command has deemed her existence undesirable, Lita continued, her voice flat. However, certain alternative solutions may be available. Greg's mind raced. What was this? A test? A trap? He studied Lita, searching for any sign of deception. Her stance was rigid, professional, but there was a tremor in her voice, a hesitation in her movements. Something wasn't right. This wasn't just a soldier following orders. "What's the catch?" he asked, his voice raspy from disuse. Lita remained silent for a moment, the only sound the hum of the prison's life support systems. "The cost is significant for both of us. Failure to comply or disclosure of this conversation will result in immediate termination. For you, for her." And she paused, the vocoder momentarily amplifying the subtle static in her voice. "For me, treason, death by association." She was risking everything. A murmur rippled through the cell block. Prisoners, those closest to Greg's cell, were whispering amongst themselves. "Rebellion," he heard one mutter. "Growing stronger," another added. The Arcturians thought they had crushed the resistance, but the embers still glowed. Greg focused on Lita. He had a daughter to save. "What do you need me to do?" Lita inclined her head slightly, a gesture that could have been interpreted as a nod. "We need to move. Now, I can arrange a temporary transfer to a less visible sector, high security but minimal surveillance." A fragmented image flashed in Lita's mind. Her mother, a fierce Arcturian warrior, whispering about freedom and resistance in the dead of night, before the Empire took her away. A memory she tried to bury, but one that now resurfaced with unsettling clarity. The first step, Lita said, her voice regaining its steely edge, is the maintenance tunnels. They run beneath the entire prison complex. We'll find a way out through the underbelly. Greg, Lita, and Alara plunged into the maintenance tunnels. The air hung thick and heavy, a miasma of ozone, stale coolant, and something indefinably organic that made Greg's stomach churn. Condensation beaded on the low slung pipes that snaked across the ceiling, dripping intermittently onto their shoulders. The only light came from Lita's helmet lamp, casting long, distorted shadows that danced with every movement. "Careful where you step," Greg muttered, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. These tunnels weren't built for regular traffic. See the stress fractures along that support beam, and the way the plating is buckled near the junction there. Whoever designed this section cut corners. Lita paused, her helmet swiveling to illuminate the areas Greg indicated. "I have never been in this section of the prison before. These tunnels are not in any of the official schematics I have seen." She glanced at Greg, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Greg met her gaze. "Which means you're trusting my judgment. Appreciate it." They continued deeper, the silence broken only by the scrape of their boots on the grimy floor. A heavy metal door blocked their path. Its locking mechanism, a complex array of interlocking plates and energy conduits, hummed with nearly unleashed power. "Security override required," Lita stated, her voice tight. "I do not have access to this level of security in my datapad." Greg knelt, examining the door more closely. He ran a gloved hand over the cool metal, tracing the intricate patterns etched into its surface. "This isn't standard Arcturian design," he murmured, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The geometric arrangement, the energy flow regulators, it's Lyrian." A flicker of memory, sharp and vivid, flashed through Greg's mind. The sun beating down on the Lyrian dig site, the thrill of uncovering a perfectly preserved energy matrix, the meticulous notes he'd taken on its activation sequence. He closed his eyes, focusing on the memory, replaying the patterns in his mind. "I think I know the code," he said, his voice regaining its confidence. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of scavenged metal, using it to manipulate the locking mechanism. He pressed, twisted, and slid the metal piece, his movements precise and deliberate. A series of soft clicks echoed in the tunnel. The door hissed open. Lita stared at Greg, her expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Lyrian? How do you know of the Lyrian?" "They have been gone for millennia. It appears the Arcturians have a habit of appropriating technology from other races," Greg said, his voice permeated with a hint of bitterness. "The Lyrians were masters of energy manipulation. It seems the Arcturians found a way to adapt their locking mechanisms." They moved deeper into the tunnels, the air growing progressively colder and damper. Alara, who had been silent until now, tugged at Greg's sleeve. "Papa, I don't like it here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I hear buzzing, it hurts my head." Lita sighed, her voice impatient. "It is just the stress, child, we need to keep moving." Greg stopped, his senses on high alert. He knelt in front of Alara. "Where do you hear the buzzing, Alara?" "Everywhere," she said, clutching her head. "But it's louder, over there." She pointed down the tunnel. Greg rose to his feet, listening intently. He couldn't hear anything out of the ordinary, just the low hum of the prison's infrastructure. But there was something unsettling about the tunnel, a subtle vibration that he couldn't quite place. He moved forward cautiously, his hand resting on the hilt of the makeshift knife he'd fashioned from a piece of broken plating. Rounding a bend, he saw it, a small, almost imperceptible lens embedded in the tunnel wall. A surveillance camera, its unblinking eye fixed on the passage ahead. Lita swore under her breath. How is this possible? This isn't standard issue Arcturian surveillance. I have never seen this before. Before Greg could react, Alara stepped forward, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. She emitted a high-pitched frequency, a piercing whine that resonated deep within Greg's skull. The camera lens flickered, then went dark, smoke curling from its housing. Lita recoiled, her hand flying to her weapon. "What did you do?" "I don't know," Alara whimpered, clutching her head. "It just happened." Lita stared at Alara, her face a mask of shock. That is not possible. Neither human nor Arcturian could do that." A klaxon blared in the distance, its harsh, discordant tone echoing through the tunnels. Red lights began to flash, casting the narrow passage in a lurid glow. "We have been detected," Lita snapped, her voice tight with urgency. "We need to go now." "But what was that?" Greg asked, gesturing towards Alara. "What did she just do?" Lita grabbed his arm, pulling him forward. "There is no time to discuss it. We must move or we will be captured." Greg allowed himself to be pulled along, but his mind was racing. Alara's ability. It was something new, something unknown, and he was determined to find out where it came from. They sprinted through the tunnels, the alarm growing louder with each passing second, the hunt now officially on. "We don't have time for this, Greg," Lita hissed, her voice tight with urgency. "Every second we waste increases the risk of being caught." Understanding her abilities can wait. The cold, metallic walls of the maintenance tunnel seemed to amplify her words, bouncing them back in a distorted echo. Greg knelt beside Alara, his hand hovering near her head but not touching. "I need to know what's happening to her. This isn't just about escape, it's about her well-being. What if this happens again? We need to understand it, control it before it kills her." A sharp clang echoed from behind them, Arcturian boots on metal grating. "They're coming!" Lita barked, already drawing her plasma pistol. "Move now!" The trio plunged deeper into the labyrinthine tunnels, the air thick with the scent of ozone and decay. Alara whimpered, clutching her head. The low hum of the tunnel's power conduits seemed to be intensifying, resonating within her. The buzzing sound that had plagued her earlier escalated, morphing into a piercing whine that grated against Greg's teeth. He saw Lita stumble, her hand flying to her helmet as if trying to block out the noise. The normally stoic Arcturian warrior was visibly disoriented, her movements sluggish. "What's happening to you?" Greg yelled over the din, grabbing Lita's arm to steady her. "Frequency," Lita gasped, her words slurred. "Interference. Unbearable." Greg's eyes darted around, assessing the environment. The tunnels were a chaotic mess of exposed wires, sparking junction boxes and humming machinery. He realized Alara's distress wasn't random. It was linked to the tunnel's technology, and whatever frequency it was emitting was amplified by her unique physiology and painful to Arcturians. "It's the tunnel," Greg shouted, his voice strained. "The energy. It's affecting her and you." He ripped a handful of wires from a nearby junction box, ignoring the shower of sparks. Scrounging for a piece of discarded metal plating, he began to improvise, twisting the wires around the metal, muttering calculations under his breath. "What are you doing?" Lita managed to ask, her breathing ragged. "Dampening the frequency," Greg replied, his fingers working with frantic speed. "If I can create a localized interference field." He finished the makeshift device and held it near Alara. The whining subsided slightly. Alara's face relaxed and her whimpers softened. Lita straightened, shaking her head as if clearing it. The piercing whine had lessened to a tolerable buzz. Lita stared at Greg, a flicker of something akin to awe in her eyes. "Ingenious," she admitted, her voice regaining its usual crispness. They pressed on, but the respite was short-lived. The tunnel opened into a wider chamber, only to reveal a dead end. A collapsed section of the tunnel, reinforced with duracrete and steel beams, blocked their path. "Damn it!" Lita slammed her fist against the wall. "A complete cave-in. There's no way through." Greg ran his hand along the cold, rough surface of the collapsed structure. His fingers brushed against something unexpected, faint, almost imperceptible markings etched into the duracrete. Lyrian script. "Wait," he said, his voice hushed. "There's something here." He pulled out his small archeo scanner, its beam illuminating the faded symbols. Lyrian, this tunnel, it predates the prison. These markings, they indicate a hidden passage. The sounds of approaching guards grew louder, their heavy footsteps echoing through the tunnels. We don't have time for riddles, Greg. Lita snapped, her plasma pistol raised. They're almost here. Greg ignored her, his brow furrowed in concentration as he scanned the Lyrian symbols. His fingers traced the outlines, trying to decipher their meaning. Alara, drawn by an unseen force, reached out and touched a specific point on the collapsed wall. A low rumble vibrated through the chamber. With a grinding groan of metal against stone, a section of the wall slid inward, revealing a narrow passage shrouded in darkness. "Get in," Greg yelled, shoving Alara forward. Lita followed, her pistol still trained on the tunnel behind them. The passage led them into a previously unknown section of the prison, an abandoned research lab. The air was thick with the stench of formaldehyde and decay. Dissected remains lay scattered across metal tables. Lyrian bodies, or what was left of them, their forms grotesquely violated. Lita recoiled, her face twisting in disgust. What is this place?" Greg moved further into the lab, his stomach churning. This is horrific. He spotted a damaged data terminal in the corner, its screen flickering erratically. He approached it cautiously, his fingers dancing across the cracked keyboard. The screen sputtered to life, displaying fragments of research logs, Arcturian experimentation with Lyrian genetics. The logs spoke of attempts to weaponize Lyrian abilities, to harness their unique physiology for military purposes. The implications slammed into Greg with the force of a physical blow. Alara's powers, they were a result of these experiments. The terminal screen flickered violently, then died, plunging the lab into near darkness. A red light flashed above the entrance. The heavy clang of a security door echoed through the lab. "They're here," Lita hissed, raising her pistol. Arcturian forces breached the lab entrance, led by a high-ranking officer. His crystalline armor gleamed under the emergency lights. His face was a mask of fury, his eyes fixed on Lita. "Stand down, Lita," the officer barked, his voice amplified by his helmet's vocoder. "Hand over the hybrid, now. Genetic integrity must be maintained." The high-ranking officer's voice boomed through the lab, amplified by his helmet's Vox system. "Warrior Lita, deliver the hybrid child. Its existence is an affront to Arcturian purity." Lita's hand tightened on her pulse rifle. A muscle twitched in her jaw beneath the helmet. Her gaze flickered between the officer and the terrified child clinging to Greg's leg. Greg shoved Alara behind him, his eyes blazing with defiance. "She's my daughter. You won't touch her." His voice, raspy from years of prison air, held a surprising force. "I'd like to see you try." "Fire!" The officer barked, and the lab erupted in crimson blaster fire. Energy bolts sizzled past Greg, scorching the air. One grazed his arm, and he cried out, stumbling. Lita roared, unleashing a torrent of plasma fire at the officer's squad. Her shots were precise, disabling rather than lethal, but effective. The Arcturian soldiers scrambled for cover, momentarily stunned. "Run!" she yelled, her voice distorted by the vocoder. "Get out of here." Greg, clutching Alara's hand, bolted towards a darkened section of the lab. Lita laid down, suppressing fire, her movements a whirlwind of controlled aggression. She knew this was treason, knew her life was forfeit, but she couldn't bring herself to hand over a child for execution. Not this child. They plunged into a chamber filled with dormant machinery, the air thick with the scent of ozone and disuse. Dust motes danced in the dim emergency lighting. In the center of the room stood a cluster of crystalline structures humming with latent energy. Lyrian technology. Alara, drawn by an unseen force, reached out a tentative hand. Her fingers brushed against a smooth, obsidian surface. The crystals flared with an intense blue light, bathing the chamber in an ethereal glow. Holographic images flickered to life, swirling around them. Scenes of a vibrant city unfolded, graceful, winged beings moved through streets lined with towering structures of polished crystal. Lush gardens cascaded down the sides of buildings. The Lyrians, a peaceful, technologically advanced civilization. Before the Arcturians, Greg stared transfixed. He recognized the architectural motifs, the energy signatures, symbols from his xenoarchaeological digs flashed before his eyes. By the stars, he breathed. They were so much more advanced than we knew. Lita burst into the chamber, her armor scorched and dented. 2 Arcturian soldiers lay groaning in the corridor behind her. "We have to go. I can't hold them off for much longer." She saw the holographic images, the Lyrian technology. A flicker of understanding crossed her face. She was now branded a traitor, her fate sealed. "This way," she said, her voice grim. "There's a maintenance tunnel behind that console." She pointed to a panel covered in Lyrian script. "The Lyrians always built hidden passages. I've heard stories." She pulled the panel away, revealing a dark opening. More than stories, these tunnels were known to a select few in the military, her sister having been one of them. As Greg moved to enter the tunnel, he noted a map etched into the device near the console. "Wait, look at this." The map showed a network of tunnels leading to the lower levels of the prison complex, a possible escape route. They squeezed into the narrow tunnel, the rough rock scraping against their skin. The air was stale and damp, heavy with the smell of mildew. After a few minutes of crawling, they heard voices ahead, Arcturian voices. "Patrol Alpha, report," a gruff voice crackled over a comm. "All clear, Captain. Just checking these old maintenance tunnels. Place gives me the creeps." Lita pressed a finger to her lips, signaling silence. They huddled in the darkness, hearts pounding. Suddenly, the tunnel lights flickered and died, plunging the patrol into absolute blackness. A collective gasp arose from the Arcturians. "What was that?" the captain barked. "Report, I can't see anything," a soldier cried. "My visor's malfunctioning." "Mine too," another voice echoed. Greg felt a tug on his sleeve. He looked down at Alara, her eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. I dimmed the lights," she whispered. "I didn't want them to see us." Greg stared at her, stunned. She could control the tunnel's technology. "You can do that." Alara shrugged, her expression innocent. "I just thought about it." They pressed on, leaving the disoriented patrol behind. They reached a small communications hub, a relic from a bygone era. Dusk coated the archaic consoles and flickering screens. "I might be able to send a distress signal," Greg said, his fingers flying across a keyboard. "Let the others know what's happening here." He began typing, his message a desperate plea for help, an explanation of his research, and a warning about the Arcturian deception. Lita grabbed his hand, slamming it down on the console, cutting off the transmission. "No," Greg whirled on her, his eyes filled with fury. "What are you doing? We need help." "You don't understand," Lita said, her voice tight with urgency. "There's a bounty on your head, Greg, a huge one. Your signal will attract every bounty hunter in the sector. They'll be here in hours." Greg stared at her, his hope collapsing. He should have known he was too dangerous to be left alive. Lita took a deep breath. "I know a way out of here, a way that the Arcturians won't expect. My sister. She was working with the local rebellion before she was caught. I can lead you to them." She paused, her gaze hardening. "It's a secret I've kept for a long time, a secret that could have gotten me killed. But I don't see that I have any choice now." Lita pressed onward, the beam of her stolen Arcturian pulse rifle cutting through the oppressive darkness of the tunnels. "The rebellion hideout is several levels deeper," she said, her voice echoing off the slick, plascrete walls. "We need to avoid the main transport arteries. More patrols since the incident." Greg, his arm protectively around Alara, frowned. "This rebellion, I heard stories in prison, ruthless tactics, civilian casualties." He adjusted his grip on Alara, pulling her closer. The air hummed with the low thrum of unseen machinery. Alara whimpered, her small hands covering her ears. "Too bright. Too loud." She stumbled, nearly falling. Lita stopped abruptly. "What's wrong?" Greg knelt beside Alara, concern etched on his face. "Sensory overload, the artificial environment, the technology, it's affecting her." As if on cue, the tunnel lights flickered erratically. A maintenance drone sputtered and died, crashing to the floor with a metallic clang. Lita's eyes widened. Her abilities, they're interacting with the systems. They pressed on, soon discovering a hidden chamber tucked away behind a collapsed section of tunnel. Soft, ethereal light emanated from within. Lita hesitated. An old Lyrian sanctuary. I thought these were just myths. Inside, the air felt cleaner, calmer. The harsh artificial light was replaced by a gentle, bioluminescent glow emanating from strange, crystalline formations. Alara visibly relaxed, her breathing evening out. Greg ran a hand over the smooth, cool surface of a large, disc-shaped device embedded in the wall. Intricate carvings adorned its surface, depicting scenes of harmony and technological advancement. The Lyrians. They were more advanced than we ever imagined, and peaceful. Why did the Arcturians erase them from history? Lita activated her comm, her voice low and urgent. This is Lita to Echo 7, respond. Static crackled in her ear. Echo 7, do you read? A gruff voice finally answered, permeated with suspicion. Lita, is that really you, or some Arcturian trick? It's me, Lita insisted. I need extraction, I have. Complications. Complications. You defected, Lita. You expect us to just welcome you back with open arms after all this time. I have information, Lita countered. Information only my sister would know. Tell me. What was the name of her favorite childhood pet? The one she swore was a miniature dragon. Silence hung in the air for a moment. Then the voice softened slightly. Sparky, fine, we'll meet you at grid Delta 94. But be warned, Arcturian patrols have increased tenfold since your little stunt. And if this is a trap, Lita cut the connection. Delta 94, let's move. They reached the designated meeting point, a cavernous intersection of tunnels, to find a small squad of rebels waiting, weapons drawn. Their leader, a hulking Arcturian warrior with scarred armor and a cybernetic eye, stepped forward. Lita, I'm Vark, drop your weapon, now. Greg stepped in front of Lita, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. Hold on, she's with me, and I can help you. Vark's cybernetic eye narrowed, focusing on Greg. A human, what makes you think we need your help, meatbag? I know Arcturian technology, Greg said, his voice steady. I studied it for years. I can help you understand their systems, exploit their weaknesses. Vark scoffed. We're planning an attack on Outpost Gamma, a crucial supply depot for the prison. It's suicide. The place is a fortress. Lita and Greg exchanged a look. Alara stirred, her eyes unfocused. Suddenly, a series of beeps and whistles erupted from the rebels' comm system. Vark cursed. Interference. We're losing signal. Alara reached out, her hand hovering over the comm unit. The static cleared, replaced by a crisp, clear signal. The rebels stared in astonishment. Greg realized the implications. She's interfacing with the technology, merging the Lyrian energy with the Arcturian systems. Vark approached Alara cautiously, his expression a mixture of awe and suspicion. What did you do, child? I just made it clearer, Alara whispered, her eyes wide. Vark turned to Lita and Greg, his voice low and serious. The outpost is heavily fortified, shielded, impenetrable, but with her, maybe, just maybe. He paused. All right, you're with us now, but failure is not an option. Gamma goes down or you die trying. We need to find a way to disable the shields. You human and you traitor will help us find it. The central control node, Vark's voice crackled over the comm. It's shielded, heavily guarded. Deactivate it and the whole outpost goes into lockdown. No one in, no one out. We need a simultaneous shutdown. The information was relayed as they moved through the tunnels, the sounds of battle echoing from above. Greg studied the schematic projected onto his wrist-mounted device. There, he said, pointing to a confluence of energy conduits. The power grid. It's archaic, based on designs I saw in Lyrian ruins. There's a vulnerability. I can design a virus, something Alara can interface with. Alara frowned, her brow furrowing. Arcturian firewalls. They're new, I can't directly connect. A rebel commando, his face scarred and weary, approached. "We have a captured drone, Archerian but old. Tech so outdated they practically gave it away." The plan solidified. The rebels would launch a frontal assault, drawing the Archerian forces to the main gates. Lita, Greg, and Alara would slip through the tunnels, infiltrate the drone bay, and Alara would pilot the antiquated drone to deliver Greg's virus to the central node. The assault began. Explosions rocked the outpost. The air thrummed with the whine of energy weapons. Lita, her face grim, led the way, her Archerian armor a stark contrast to the rough-hewn tunnels. Greg, weapon in hand, stayed close to Alara, his eyes scanning for threats. The drone bay was a scene of frantic activity. Technicians scrambled to repair damaged drones, their faces tight with fear. Lita moved with brutal efficiency, her energy blade carving through the Archerian security forces. Greg covered her flank, his pulse rifle spitting bolts of plasma. Alara, her hands trembling slightly, connected to the captured drone. The cockpit was cramped, the controls unfamiliar. "It's clunky," she said, her voice strained, "like flying a rock." "I'll guide you," Greg said, his voice calm and reassuring. "I know the layout of this outpost." Lita, tactical overview. "Straight ahead," Lita said, her eyes flicking between her own tactical display and the chaos around them. 2 patrols, then the main corridor to the central node. Alara piloted the drone, its engines whining, through the narrow corridors. Greg's knowledge of the outpost's architecture, gleaned from years of research, proved invaluable. Lita's tactical insights helped them avoid ambushes. Suddenly, alarms blared, red lights flashed. "They know," Lita growled. "Commanders rerouting power." "Energy surge detected," Alara said, her voice tight with panic. "It's overloading the drone." Greg's mind raced. "Alara, can you redirect it?" Alara closed her eyes, focusing her abilities. "There's a conduit, the communication array." "Do it," Greg shouted. With a surge of power, Alara redirected the energy overload into the outpost's communication array. The screens flickered and died. The outpost was cut off from reinforcements. "We're exposed now," Lita said, her voice grim. "They know exactly where we are." They fought their way to the control room. The door hissed open, revealing the Archerian commander, her face a mask of fury. Energy crackled around her personal shield. The fight was brutal. Lita and the commander exchanged blows, their energy blades clashing. Greg, using his modified Lyrian artifact, fired a pulse of energy, disrupting the commander's shield, leaving her vulnerable. Lita seized the opportunity, her blade finding its mark. The commander staggered, her eyes wide with disbelief. You were researching the Lyrians," she gasped. "I had you imprisoned to protect my legacy, to ensure my people remained safe." "Safe from the truth?" Greg retorted, his voice filled with contempt. Lita, Greg, and Alara joined the rebels in their final push. The tide had turned. Inspired by their courage, the rebels fought with renewed ferocity. The Archerian forces, demoralized and cut off from reinforcements, began to crumble. The outpost fell. The prisoners were freed. They emerged blinking into the dim light, their faces etched with years of suffering. One by one, they knelt before Alara, Lita, and Greg, swearing allegiance to the rebellion. "We will fight with you," they vowed, "for freedom." Alara, using her unique abilities, began to enhance the rebellion's communication network, connecting them with other resistance cells scattered across the Archerian Empire. Hope, like a fragile seedling, began to sprout in the darkness. Greg and Lita stood side by side on the captured outpost, the sounds of celebration echoing around them. The air was still thick with the smell of smoke and battle, but there was a sense of hope, of a future worth fighting for. "She's amazing," Greg said, looking at Alara, who was surrounded by rebels, her face glowing with purpose. "She can unite them, Lita. She can unite us all." Lita turned to Greg, her eyes filled with emotion. "I was so wrong about you," she said softly. "About humans. About everything." "We all were," Greg replied, taking her hand. "But we're not wrong about this, about us." He pulled her close and they kissed, a kiss of love, of hope, of a shared future. Elara looked over and smiled, understanding passing between them. They were a family, forged in the